When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I had found the perfect place to start fish. The houses were neat, the streets were quiet, and the lake behind the community shimmered like something out of a painting. From the first moment I saw it, I knew I wanted to spend long afternoons by that water, fishing and letting the stress of life drift away. I didn't see it as a hobby but more as therapy, something that had always kept me grounded. So on my very first weekend, I set up a fishing rod, cast the line into the water, and smiled as the gentle ripples spread outward. The scene was so peaceful that I forgot time, until a sharp voice cut through the calm like a knife. She came striding down the dock like she owned the world. Clipboard in hand, heels clacking loudly against the wood, Karen introduced herself as the head of the homeowners association. Her face was tight with disapproval before I even opened my mouth. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing, and when I calmly answered, "Fishing," she gave me a smirk that dripped with superiority. "Fishing is strictly prohibited here," she said, writing furiously on her clipboard. "You'll be fined $200. At first, I laughed, thinking it was some strange welcome joke, but when she handed me the slip of paper marked with fine, I realized she was deadly serious. The fine felt like an insult, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just overzealous about her role. But over the following weeks, I learned that Karen wasn't just strict, she was a tyrant. Every time I went near the lake, she or one of her board members appeared like hawks circling prey. They fined me for loitering by the water, for casting a line, and even once for sitting suspiciously close to the dock. It was laughable, and yet the numbers added up. 200 here, 150 there, it was draining my patience and my wallet. This wasn't about rules anymore, this was about power. I decided to take the fight to them directly, so I attended an HOA meeting. The moment I entered the room, the cold stares from the board members told me I wasn't welcome. Karen presided at the head of the table, banging her gavel like she was a judge in a courtroom. When it came time for me to speak, I laid out my concerns, how unfair the rules were, how the lake should be accessible to residents, how fishing was harmless. But Karen cut me off mid-sentence, snapping that, rules are rules, and the board members chuckled like trained dogs. I walked out that evening more frustrated than ever, realizing logic had no place in their little kingdom. The breaking point came one morning when I found yet another fine taped to my door, accusing me of excessive loitering. I hadn't even gone near the lake that day. Something inside me snapped. I was tired of being treated like a criminal for simply enjoying the peace of my own neighborhood. That night, I sat down at my desk, pulled up county records, and started researching everything I could about the lake. Who owned it? How was it managed? Did the HOA actually have the right to enforce these rules? What I discovered made my heart pound with excitement. The HOA didn't own the lake at all. It was private property, and the elderly owner had listed it for sale months ago. The more I thought about it, the clearer the path became. Instead of fighting endless battles with Karen and her petty rules, I could take away the very ground she stood on. I called the owner the next morning. He was an older gentleman, kind but tired of dealing with maintenance and liability. For him, the lake was a burden, but for me, it was freedom. We began negotiations, and though it wasn't cheap, I knew it would be worth every penny. Over the next few weeks, we went back and forth until, finally, with a firm handshake and a stack of signed papers, the lake became mine. I held the deed in my hands like a weapon forged from patience and persistence. News of my purchase spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, everyone in the neighborhood knew. Karen showed up on my doorstep, practically shaking with rage, waving HOA documents in my face. She screamed that I couldn't just take their lake, that it belonged to the community. Calmly, I pulled out the deed and showed it to her. Her face drained of color. This isn't possible," she stammered, for once completely speechless. "Oh, it's very possible," I said, enjoying every word. For the first time since I moved in, I felt like I was no longer under her thumb. Owning the lake wasn't just a victory, it was power. But instead of letting it sit quietly, I decided to teach them all a lesson. I erected new signs around the perimeter: private property. No trespassing. No exceptions. The same neighbors who had watched silently as I was fined and humiliated now found themselves locked out. Families who once picnicked by the shore stood at the gates, staring at the water they could no longer reach. Children who played by the dock were told to leave. It was poetic justice, and I couldn't deny the satisfaction it gave me. The outrage came quickly. Some neighbors tried to reason with me, offering to pay for access. Others demanded that I reconsider for the good of the community. But where were they when I was being fined, humiliated, and treated like an outsider? Their silence had been deafening, and now mine would be, too. I turned them all away with the same coldness they once showed me. The lake that had once been their pride now stood as a monument to their hypocrisy. Karen tried one last desperate move, rallying the HOA to protest. She gathered a group at the gates, shouting about justice and fairness. But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. They had grown tired of her arrogance and endless rules. One by one, they walked away, leaving her standing alone, screaming at the water that was no longer hers to control. For the first time, Karen looked small, and in that moment, I knew her reign was over. The neighborhood began to change after that day. Without access to the lake, the community lost the charm that once made it desirable. Property values started slipping, and the HOA's meetings grew smaller and smaller. Without their precious lake to flaunt, their authority crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. I watched all of it unfold from my porch, sipping coffee while the water glistened peacefully behind me. It felt like justice, not just for me, but for every quiet homeowner who had ever been bullied into submission by the HOA's iron grip. Karen, once the queen of the neighborhood, had become a shadow. No longer feared, she walked the streets with her head down, muttering under her breath whenever she saw me. The same people who once supported her had turned against her, blaming her arrogance for their loss. I heard whispers of angry neighbors confronting her, demanding she resign, and within months, the inevitable happened: she sold her house and left. She disappeared as quickly as she had entered my life, leaving behind only the echo of her rules and the bitter taste of her downfall. Meanwhile, I thrived. Every evening, I strolled down to the lake with my fishing rod, casting a line into the calm water. The silence was sweeter now, flavored by victory. Sometimes I would sit there for hours, catching nothing, and still feel content. It wasn't about the fish anymore, it was about reclaiming peace, about proving that no one had the right to strip me of something so simple and pure. The lake had become more than property. It was a symbol, a reminder that persistence could turn injustice into triumph. It wasn't long before a few neighbors approached me privately. Unlike the rest, they weren't angry. They were ashamed. They admitted they had stayed silent out of fear, not loyalty to the HOA. Some even apologized for watching me get fined and ridiculed without speaking up. At first, I was cold. Their words couldn't erase what had been done. But as time passed, I realized they were sincere. And slowly, I began to let them join me, one at a time, to fish quietly by my side. The difference was clear. Those who came did so with humility, not entitlement. They brought their own chairs, cleaned up after themselves, and treated the lake with the respect it deserved. For them, I opened the gate. For the rest, the ones who had mocked me, turned their backs, or begged only out of convenience, the gate remained locked. The lake had become a mirror, reflecting not just the sun and sky, but the true nature of people's hearts. As for the HOA, it never fully recovered. Without Karen's iron fist, it became just another group of tired neighbors, holding meetings that no one cared to attend. Rules were loosened, fines were reduced, and the once feared authority became little more than paperwork. It was almost sad, in a way, to watch them shrink into irrelevance. But then I'd remember the humiliation, the laughter, the endless tickets on my door, and sadness turned into satisfaction. There were nights when I'd sit by the water and replay everything in my mind. The first time Karen had marched up to me with that smug look. The first fine. The way they all laughed in the meeting hall. I thought about how easy it would have been to simply give up, to sell my house, to walk away. But I hadn't. I had stood firm, and because of that, the lake was now mine, free of their grasp forever. In time, the community adjusted. The lake was no longer theirs, but life moved on. New families moved in, never knowing the battle that had taken place. Sometimes, when I watched them walk past the locked gate with curiosity in their eyes, I felt tempted to tell them the story. But then I'd smile, knowing the lake would always keep its secrets. To them, it was just a body of water. To me, it was a war one had won. The peace I had once longed for was finally mine, but it was deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about fishing or enjoying the view, it was about dignity, about reclaiming my right to live without being crushed under the weight of unfair rules. The lake glistened every morning like a crown, and every time I saw its surface shimmer, I felt like it nodded back at me, silently honoring the struggle that had been fought for it. And so, the story came full circle. The HOA had fined me for fishing, trying to strip me of something small but meaningful. In the end, I had taken everything from them, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. Sometimes, life demands we fight not with fists or anger, but with patience and strategy. And when we do, the victory tastes sweeter than we could have ever imagined. Moral of the story: arrogance and control may grant temporary power, but it always collapses under its own weight. True strength lies in patience, resilience, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when you stand alone.